Now, summing up George Washington, you will often hear apologists for George Washington, such as myself, to say things like he was a man of his times. After all, he was a slave owner, right? It's hard to condemn, or you shouldn't condemn, people for not being modern when they existed so long ago. But from my point of view, I say that's not good enough. That won't do. He was a man ahead of his times in so many ways. The fact that he promoted constitutional government made him a man of his times. He promoted it, he defended it. That is what he considered the right way to have a government. That is a man ahead of his times. He refused time and time again to legally prosecute people who savaged him in the press. That is a man ahead of his time. Despite the fact that he was hurt deeply, he was angered, as I mentioned, but he would not seek any way of putting them down legally. He endured the hysteria of the people on more than one occasion, when people were mobs in the street up to his very house. He still could wait. I say patiently, but that's probably not true. But he did wait. And he knew that the enthusiasm of the crowd does not last forever. It has its height and then it dissipates. And he waited for the right time to make his public statements. Once the hysteria has passed, that is a man ahead of his times. He warmly accepted all Christian faiths. He did not have the religious bigotry that was so common back in those days. He even, I once read a letter that he wrote to a Jewish synagogue, not even Christian, a very warm letter of support for this Jewish synagogue. He willingly gave up power twice when he could have kept it, and with the support of those around him. When he gave up power, released his commission as general of the army to a very feeble and disorganized Congress. That was a landmark. King George III in England, when he heard about this, he said, if he does this, he'll be the greatest man in the world. And he did, willingly give up power when he could have taken it to himself. He gave up the presidency when he could have very easily become president for the rest of his life. He gave it up. Napoleon, in his last days, said, they wanted me to be another George Washington. Napoleon was not George Washington. In his will, he freed his slaves, something that, again, is a man ahead of his time. He knew that slavery was untenable, it was unjust, and wanted to do what he could to rid the nation of it. It was never anything that he could really do at that point as president, and some people consider that a failure of his, and in a sense it is. But there really wasn't anything he could have done at that point. But he did free his slaves in his will, and he made sure. I actually have a book, and I don't have it here, that is about his will. And he states in his will unequivocally that my slaves, they will be freed and they will be taken care of. You will make sure that they have the skills to support themselves in an occupation. The elderly that cannot work will be taken care of, and there will be no excuse for this not to happen. He mentions this emphatically because he knows from sorry experience that sometimes overseers are very lax in their duties and do not do what they're supposed to. But he emphasizes there will be no excuse for this not to be taken care of to the letter.